Yes, people, what's happening? Welcome back to the channel and welcome back to another live stream and your daily Chelsea transfer update. As you can see, I'm delighted to be joined by Ben Jacobs for all the lowdown on the latest Chelsea news. Jhon Duran, possible chances of Julian Alvarez, the latest on Michael Olise. Could there be any other strikers involved? And just any other general transfer news. Big up to everyone that's locked in, guys. Make sure you're smashing the likes. Make sure you get involved in the chat. Subscribe to the channel if you're new around here. Just 40 subscribers away now from the big 10K. So make sure if you're not subscribed, get subscribed, guys. We could even chalk those off today. So please do subscribe. Please run the likes up. But let's dive into it. Ben, only one place to start. Chelsea's pursuit of Jhon Duran, the Aston Villa striker. Now, it's not really come as a surprise to myself or other Chelsea fans. We knew the interest was there in January. Apparently, interest was there previously before he left the MLS for Aston Villa. How much of a priority target is Duran for Chelsea? And is this very much a reactionary effect to Benjamin Sesko deciding to stay at Leipzig? Or was that more of a, I don't want to say a smokescreen, but was that more of perhaps a little cover up for Chelsea's pursuit of Duran? Because how serious was Sesko on leaving Leipzig? Or was he and his agent potentially using the interest from the Premier League to get himself an improved contract?
Yeah, hi everyone. Hope you're well. Good to be back on the show. So you're always spinning multiple plates, of course, but I don't think Chelsea were ever that confident about Sesko. They were serious about him, but there's been a feeling in the industry, probably for the last fortnight, that Sesko was leaning towards staying, and was he to leave, maybe Arsenal was the more concrete possibility, simply because they could offer Champions League football and something role-wise that was a bit more suited to Sesko, given that that kind of profile is missing at the football club. The challenge with any striker in Chelsea, one that's young and has had a lot of game time, is just where do they fit in? And that's the most intriguing part of this Maresca 4-3-3. Leading the line could be Jackson, it could be Nkunku as a false nine, it could be a new striker, but you got to find a way of fitting them all in. There's not much difference, I suppose, between 4-2-3-1 and 4-3-3, but it does present an interesting challenge, whereas we know that Arsenal don't really have a Sesko-like player. So he stayed at Leipzig. Jhon Duran, long-standing target. We know Chelsea might have moved in January if he hadn't got injured. And the main point to take away with Duran is just that Unai Emery doesn't see the player as part of his plans. So Emery wants to sell. And Emery's not running the recruitment, but Emery wants to sell. So that gives Chelsea an opportunity. Now, I know people are joking about Duran and then Duran, and therefore using the name twice. Maybe that means it's 20 million, and that's where we're getting this 40 million number. But I don't think Chelsea are thinking that high. So it is going to be interesting to see whether or not Chelsea can get a valuation closer to where they were talking around in January, which was more like 25 to 30 million, or whether the price has been hiked up. At the time we're recording this, of course, things can change very quickly. I'm not aware of any verbal agreement as has been reported elsewhere, but talks are ongoing. So there is a realistic possibility that Duran is the name that Chelsea move for. Let's wait and see. There's others on the list. Evan Ferguson is another possibility, but I don't think Sesko was a cover-up. Chelsea, Arsenal, Manchester United put firm and fixed proposals because Sesko had made the point he didn't want to have any dragged-on negotiations. He wanted the best offers and the final offers on the player side anyway to be put down, and then he would decide if he was going to engage. At that point, obviously, suitors would have to determine if they went to Leipzig and triggered the clause or tried to negotiate around it. But Sesko wanted the player side firmly and fixed on the table so he could assess all options and make his decision. And I don't think Chelsea feel panicked or defeated in any way. I just think they feel that Sesko felt the best thing for his development was to stay at Leipzig.
I mean, obviously, Duran, we probably expect it to happen. Obviously, there's no guarantees in football, but it looks like it's heading towards that way that he will join Chelsea. For me and a lot of fans, it feels a bit strange because it's not necessarily what Chelsea need in terms of, you're looking for a striker to complement and compete with Nicholas Jackson. You're looking for someone that, is perhaps a more reliable source of goals, a bit more of a rounded player, someone that can come into the team and make an impact. I haven't necessarily got a problem with Duran himself. Like in isolation, as a talented player, there's good attributes there. But when you're adding that to a front line that contains Nicholas Jackson, and if you were to go into your season with Duran and Jackson as your number 9 options, when you've got a vastly inexperienced manager as well, it feels like you're taking a huge gamble and you're massively undercooked in those attacking areas. You know, an injury to Nicholas Jackson would leave you with just Jhon Duran up front. I know Nkunku can maybe fill in there, but he's not exactly a prolific out-and-out number 9. Is there a likelihood that there could be more than just Duran? Because I just feel like it's a huge gamble to take to go in with a massively unproven player. This is someone that's more unproven than Nicholas Jackson was before he joined the Premier League. So is there a chance we could see someone else come in as well alongside Duran?
No, I think they'll be looking for one striker, and there's plenty of others at the club as well. So they're going to have to determine the futures of various players too. David Datro Fofana is quite an interesting name, and he did well on a loan spell at Burnley. So there's other options. Like you say, you've got Nkunku, you've got Jackson, and then they have to resolve the situations with Broja and also with Lukaku. So then later in the window, maybe they'll feel that there's a more experienced name. This is if they move for Duran. They'll be looking at other possibilities, and they'll probably be having that internal discussion and making that point that you've just made to try and work out what's best. But I don't think that they will be offsetting a less experienced manager with a more experienced player. I think you invest in Maresca, so therefore you trust as a team that he's right for the job. So it doesn't really alter your recruitment strategy. Then regarding the outgoings, David Datro Fofana could be listened to. I've seen Emilio with needless O's at the end of his name and needless comments in the chat talking about Broja, and I stand by my news. By the way, 2 days after my news, and some got info to the contrary, if you read The Athletic and if you read Sky Sports, they've both said 48 hours after my news that Everton are in talks with Chelsea for Amanda Broja. So obviously it's up to you what news you believe and what journalists you follow. Just be respectful. And I always answer questions and I always give you my information. But what I broke was that Everton are in talks for Broja. Everton are pushing for Broja. And it's going to take 30 million, which is the number that's been discussed. We all know that Everton are going to have to sell a Branthwaite or a Calvert-Lewin to make the deal possible. We also know that Everton may have to lean upon any new ownership because of their financial situation. But if you want to shout down somebody's work, then that's fine. You're entitled to it. I have no issue with it. I'm not defensive about it. But all I would say is that I'm pretty consistent with my information, right or wrong. And in an unpredictable market, we all get things wrong as well. And I think we'd be a little bit arrogant to say that every single ounce of every single news that we ever report always turns out to be correct. But what I reported exclusively was that Everton are in for Broja. Everton are in talks with Chelsea. 30 million packages discussed. And we all know there's challenges for the deal. And then some said that they have info to the contrary, and I fully respect that as well. But also, since that, go and read The Athletic, go and read Sky Sports News, go and read a few other outlets who are also now saying that Chelsea are in dialogue with Everton, which is exactly what I reported. So I stand by the information, and I appreciate you asking the question. You can do it respectfully or you can do it non-respectfully, but I'll always look at it and read it and answer it and engage with it and pass on the information in the most honest way that I can. And I still stand by the story about Broja. Now, they're not the only club. We can rule out Monaco. That was another thing in my Give Me Sport article 2 days ago that I wrote. But Milan, if Xerxes falls through. So Chelsea are not going to find a problem in terms of suitors for Broja. The issue is just going to be price and structure. And we know that Chelsea still value Broja highly. So if he goes, and or Fofana, and of course, remember, they want this 45 million euros or 38 million pounds for Lukaku as well. Then to come back to your question, they might be able to look for a more experienced name to come in addition, were they to go for Duran. But right now, I'm hearing one striker and only one striker. I'm hearing a large amount of the budget will be put towards this wide player, which is where the Olise links are gathering. And then, of course, because they've got Tosin on a free transfer, they want a young left back. They're in a position where they've freed up a little bit of budget. Like if Duran is only, and I say only, but in the context of the inflated market, it's a smaller number. If Duran is only 35 million or 30 million, Tosin's a free transfer, a young left back comes in. If they don't choose to move on the goalkeeper front, then they've got a large proportion of their budget that they can throw at a winger. And make no mistake, the reason why winger has become even more important is because even though Enzo Maresca's not got any real control over this first window because the plans were pre-existing, and even though he's the same as Pochettino, no autonomy, no veto or anything like that, the fact he's obsessed in his system with wingers over wide forwards may well convince Chelsea to prioritise big money on a winger, as opposed to saying, well, Nkunku could lead the line and Jackson could go wide left. Sterling could come and play as a wide forward, but Maresca's going to be about wingers that get white chalk on the boots. And this is where Olise may have risen in Chelsea's thinking because of the style that they know Maresca's playing.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to get to Olise. Just a couple more things on the striker situation. Two things on an ad. Is there any chance that Conor Gallagher could be involved in the Jhon Duran deal, or if Gallagher were to go to Villa, do you envisage those to be two separate transactions?
Yeah, I mean, they're linked, but they're not linked. And by that, I mean that they're two separate transactions. And the most logical reason for that is because you don't want to tie in a Gallagher exit. Gallagher might want to go elsewhere. He might not want to go. And also Gallagher's at the Euros, whereas if Chelsea move for Duran, they want to get that one done quickly. So by default, you have to do one and get the player you want, and then let the Gallagher situation, which is a bigger saga, resolve itself. So they're not linked. There's no swap deal, but they're linked in the sense that if Villa choose to advance on Conor Gallagher, they're going to need to fund that deal. And that will require Duran money and possibly Douglas Luiz money. So you've got two separate deals that may well, if anything materializes, happen at two separate times. But the link is down to the fact that Villa may have held exploratory talks on Gallagher. That's true to my understanding, as first reported by David Ornstein, I believe. But Villa can't advance anything. Villa can't just drop 50 plus million on Conor Gallagher. They're not in that financial position. So they are handcuffed on Gallagher. And Chelsea, if they choose to proceed with Duran, are intent on advancing that, not putting pressure on it to be related to a Gallagher exit. But if they get the money for Duran, then maybe Villa are in a position where they can move.
And in terms of, we saw yesterday, Dominic Solanke linked as a possible name that could be on Chelsea's shortlist. I've seen a Matt Law report stating that, there could be another two names on the shortlist. I mean, Solanke, 19 Premier League goals last season at Bournemouth. Very good season. Knows Chelsea, having come through the academy there. Is there any chance that we could see this happening? I mean, the £65 million release clause, is expensive. What are you hearing in regards to Solanke and potentially leaving Bournemouth this summer at all? And where do Chelsea stand? Is there any interest there?
I think he's been discussed internally, but nothing more than that at this stage. There's no suggestion that they think the release clause is value. And Solanke's not in a massive rush to leave Bournemouth either. So I don't think he's a leading contender. But there has been some discussions. It's kind of like Evan Ferguson as well. He's there as a name in the background that they've done due diligence on. And this is normal because it's not about having a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of targets. It's about having a deep pool of targets that you can concurrently work on and then work out not only what's right, but what's attainable and what's affordable. So people don't realize, because it always gets told in retrospect as things happened. So you focus on the things we know that either definitely happened or definitely broke down. So if you look at Olise, who we'll come on to, I know, in a moment, people say Chelsea's top priority, Chelsea approached, Chelsea thought they triggered the clause, it collapsed, they got Cole Palmer, because that's what the chronology in retrospect appears. But that's simply not how it worked. Chelsea had 4 targets, and Cole Palmer was not the backup to Olise, but he also wasn't the second name on the list that Chelsea immediately went for. He was number 4 in terms of the chronology. But that doesn't mean he's ranked 4. It just means they had 4 options that they were working on, different people, different stages. So then you've always got the ability to go in any direction. And then when Olise fell through, they were sport for other choices. They chose Cole Palmer, but Palmer wasn't waiting and unaware of Chelsea interest and thinking, oh, Olise's going to Chelsea. And then a call comes out the blue and it's like, wow, they want me. It was much more considered than that. So it's the same here. You're lining up 4 or 5 different names because that's the investment. You can't just go for one name and then not get, say, Sesko and then start again. Otherwise, the players think, well, I'm the backup, or the players think you've not invested any time and energy. So this is why you hear so many names. So with Dominic Solanke, let's wait and see. You're going to hear a lot of like duff links or exaggerated links. I know for a fact that there's whispers of Watkins and Chelsea, and I'm told there's nothing in that. And again, guess what? Watkins wants a new Villa deal. So all of the speculation helps when he finally returns from the Euros and negotiates what likely, I think, will be a new Villa deal. And I wonder whether with Solanke, he would be open to improved terms at Bournemouth as well. So at the moment, I'm not aware of anything advanced on the Chelsea front. I wouldn't rule it out categorically. I think he'll have been a name, to my knowledge, that has been discussed, but nothing more than that at this point. And then with Solanke, just in case there's any, dare I say, non-Chelsea fans in the stream, we can rule out a return to Newcastle, or I say a return, I mean a return playing under Eddie Howe, and we can rule out Spurs as well, who won't be moving for Dominic Solanke.
One last striker that, there's been a lot of noise around, a lot of excitement from Chelsea fans potentially. Julian Alvarez's situation. The Athletic reporting yesterday that he's been open to a move for a number of months. He said that his preferred destination would be Real Madrid. There's not really any space there, certainly not this summer. There's the friendship with Enzo Fernandez. There's the chance, to maybe play more regularly at Chelsea than he would at Man City, although he does play a lot of minutes for City, in fairness to him. Alvarez, where are we here? This is one that's kind of, I don't want to say come out of the blue, but I think it's one that certainly myself as a Chelsea fan wasn't really expecting at all. We know that PSG has spoken to his agents. Atletico Madrid can't really afford him, even though they like the player, but there's been nothing from any Premier League clubs as yet. From what you're hearing, from just your thoughts in general, do you expect Chelsea or to make an approach for Alvarez, or do you think that's kind of a bit wide of the mark?
It's not so much wide of the mark because there's opportunism there. The player will need guarantees this game time is going to continue. But as you rightly say, I was really surprised when I looked. Based on last season, 38 Premier League games, of course, he started 31 of them. And some of that was down to injuries and some of that was down to a long old season. But I was really surprised when I saw that number. And if he gets the same guarantees, then naturally he'll just stay at Man City. And Manchester City are not in any need to sell, but we know from Cole Palmer and also from Raheem Sterling, when the player goes to the Man City hierarchy and specifically to Pep Guardiola and says, I want another challenge, usually Guardiola is very understanding and thinks about his players, which is what makes him such a great manager from a human perspective as well. And that's a very underrated skill in a manager, to be able to say, I want what's best for my player as a human, for their family, not just thinking about me as a manager and my club. And when players have managers like that, they tend to stay loyal to managers like that because they know the door's never shut. And you'll see that with Bernardo Silva if he wants to leave, with Kevin De Bruyne if he wants to leave. So let's kind of wait and see on this one. But there's nothing that Chelsea have done yet in terms of initiating any contact. But again, and I know that this sounds like a broken record, but with Ferguson, with Solanke, with Alvarez, they're all there in the background. Challenge with Alvarez is it's a 70 million plus deal, to my understanding. And Manchester City's position is still that they don't want to sell, caveated by what I've just said. And PSG are a more realistic suitor, not only because Julian Alvarez may be persuaded to have an experience in a new league, but PSG have got Champions League. They can offer bigger wages than Chelsea. And they've got this Mbappe budget freed up by his departure because of foregone bonuses and saved wages. So it's going to be interesting because we always think of the Premier League as major players in the market for these kind of players. But because of PSR, we're in a position where Chelsea don't just have that 70 million to throw at Alvarez if they also want Olise. So you got to suddenly think about the business collectively. And that's where Tosin is a steal. A free transfer is never free, but we can certainly call it economical. And that means that they might be able to move for Olise. But if they moved for Olise and got Olise, then they're not going to have 70 million to suddenly chuck on Julian Alvarez. In likelihood anyway, because depending on other outgoings, they may still take another centre-back. They may need a young left-back. They will, I know I said earlier, they want to stick and assess the two main goalkeepers, but because of the Kepa situation, it is likely that they may need another goalkeeper anyway to add to the senior squad. So then collectively, how do you do all of that for under 200 million or under 150 million if your starting point is 70 million for Julian Alvarez and then 60 million, 65 million, depending on the complicated release clause for Michael Olise? So that's where Tosin may actually be quite a smart bit of business, not just because of what he brings, but the fact it changes and migrates the budget to other more key priority positions without having to worry about bringing in a crazily expensive centre-back. So I think Alvarez is more likely to be PSG, not Chelsea. There is interest, but it's nothing more than that at this stage.
I know I said I was going to move on from strikers, but there are a couple of things in the chat about Viktor Gyokeres, Sporting Lisbon striker, exceptional season last season under Ruben Amorim, following his move from Coventry the previous summer. I believe release clause about 100 million euros, about 85, 88 million pounds. He had been touted with a move, the likes of Arsenal may be interested, Chelsea may be interested. From what I've sort of had a little look around, that's kind of died down a little bit in terms of sort of any noise surrounding a potential move for him. What are you hearing on Gyokeres? And do you think like the likelihood of Chelsea pursuing a move for him is maybe past?
Unlikely. I think he was ruled out in January, and Chelsea were never going to spend that kind of money anyway on a player like that in January. So ruling out in January was with a view to this summer. According to my info anyway, it's not correct to my understanding, despite some reports at the time that this 85 million euros bid was placed by Chelsea for Viktor Gyokeres. And at the time that there were rumblings, there was an advancement at that kind of number. Sources I was speaking to on the Chelsea side and on the player side were adamant that nothing was advanced, nothing was formal, nothing was tabled. And then a few weeks after that, the same sources had indicated that Chelsea had looked at Gyokeres and ruled him out. And I'm not aware that that's changed since.
Okay, fair enough. So we won't look forward to him then. But let's move on to the main target, Michael Olise. Obviously, Chelsea last summer, thought they had a deal wrapped up, activated a £35 million release clause. It ended up falling through for whatever reasons. Olise extended his contract at Palace, new release clause in there, higher value than before. Surprisingly, Chelsea, pushing for another wide play, even though, you've got Sterling, Mudryk, Madueke, Palmer played off the right for a lot of last season. You've got Esteval, Willian and Kendry Pires coming in 2025. But when there's a player of Michael Olise's quality available, it's hard to say no and not take that sort of opportunity. Joe Shields is very keen to bring him in, good relationship with the player. Olise knows Chelsea, his brother's there. He's been at the academy before, wouldn't have to move. He's living in London still. We know that Man United are also interested. How big a factor is the fact that Erik ten Hag is now staying? Do you think that increases United's chances of getting Olise, or do you think it doesn't really change much at all? And from what Fabrizio Romano was reporting, Chelsea are slightly ahead in the race, but does the confirmation of ten Hag staying, does that bring United back into contention further?
Yeah, I mean, Chelsea are, in inverted commas, ahead, or I would term it more advanced. And that's only because they have clarity of their plans. This is the last window in a 4-window plan. And Chelsea sources are adamant, and I'll say it loudly for those at the back, that PSR this financial year is not of a concern. They're calm. And as a result of that, it removes the 30th of June deadline, which means the idea that Chelsea need to sell, wait, buy, or sell, look at the books, then buy, or buy in the next financial year because they don't want to put it on these books. None of that is a factor. The 30th of June deadline, Chelsea sources are adamant, is not relevant. And consequently, they can move, buying or selling, with a view to putting the money on the following year's books. And that allows them to proceed. And I think it's become apparent because Maresca's joined and he's obsessed with wingers, that Olise is a concrete target. Whereas with Manchester United, they can't just drop 60, 65 million without working out, is it going to be Sancho's sale funding it, Greenwood sale funding it, Casemiro sale funding it? It's not they don't have the funds, it's that they haven't until yesterday settled the manager. And of course, Olise is going to ask that question, who am I playing under and in what system? And that gives Chelsea an advantage. But the disadvantage is that Olise is a slow, methodical decision maker. So this isn't a first come, first serve type scenario. This is a domino effect where, in likelihood, when one club formally approaches Crystal Palace, another club will, and another club will. And I would keep an eye on Man City. I don't see how Newcastle can fund it unless Bruno Guimaraes goes. But I think Manchester City might be a dark horse as well for Olise, even though it seemed for many, many weeks, and sources have indicated for many, many weeks, it's a kind of Chelsea versus Manchester United. I've just got a sneaky suspicion that Manchester City will, I'm not saying definitively enter the race, but cannot be fully discounted. Whereas I just don't see Newcastle in the conversation unless we work out that they're going to get a lot bigger budget via an outgoing. The other things that will slow it down are, number one, contrary to some reports that suggest verbal terms agreed with Olise, this is a complicated release clause. And the way that you land Olise has to be via Palace first. In other words, even though it's commonplace in football to go to the player camp and it's accepted that that kind of approach, as long as you're transparent about it, is not tapping up. In this instance, Crystal Palace are not just the seller, they're the intermediary between buyer and Olise. And if you want to trigger the clause, you do that via Palace. If you want to place an offer that's not in the clause, you do that via Palace. And Olise has agreed, which is why the clause is complicated, to have Palace represent offers and then pass them on to the player side. At which point, Palace will inform the suitor if Olise wishes to negotiate personal terms. So if anybody in the coming weeks tells you that Olise has agreed personal terms with Chelsea, and I'm not shutting down anybody's work, and I'm not saying that others are wrong, but what I'm saying is if it's at that point, the club has already gone to Crystal Palace. And we know from 12 months ago that Chelsea will want to do this by the book, because there were all manner of accusations from Palace about tapping up and triggering the clause in the wrong manner that Chelsea vociferously deny, but ultimately the deal fell through and Olise ended up extending. So Chelsea will be very wary and will want to make sure that they do this in the way that Crystal Palace expect. So the next step is going to Palace, not going to Olise. And I think Chelsea are just more in a position in their head, in their budget, in their strategy, where they can do that. Whereas Manchester United might need a bit more time. Joe Shields is obviously a factor, as is the fact that Olise's brother's at Chelsea. It doesn't really require a move in terms of city. I'm not saying he definitively won't move house or anything, but he stays in London. And on top of that, in his head, at points 12 months ago, he was already a Chelsea player. So that's the good news. The bad news is the price has nearly doubled since 12 months ago. And he is, as I understand, I know there's some contention over this, a boyhood Manchester United fan. So maybe in theory, his heart says Manchester United, his head says Chelsea, but the reality is that the player is going to listen to all offers. So this isn't something one club can just bulldoze. This is going to be a quick, I sense, but considered decision by Olise. And the last point, just put on people's radars, which I think is underrated and forgotten, is that Michael Olise is in the France squad for the Olympic Games and would like to play in that tournament. And if it comes down to one club saying you can play and one club saying you can't play, it's not going to be the only factor, but that will help a club to say to Olise, you don't have to withdraw from Thierry Henry's squad. And it's difficult, isn't it? Because Chelsea can always say we agree to it, but only because you were bound by it from your Palace days. But what does Malo Gusto and Benoit Badiashile think, who both wanted to go to the Olympics along with Leslie Ukwachukwu? And Ukwachukwu is only going, and Gusto and Badiashile were told this because he's not as integral, which might mean that he gets loaned out next season. But Gusto and Badiashile will see a box office player like Olise potentially join Chelsea, and they may think, how can he go to the Olympics and we can't? And the other possibility is just Palace are flying, right? And they've got all manner of star assets. There's interest in Wharton, which I find bizarre because he's still relatively new to the club. There's interest in Eze. There's interest in Gueye. Once Palace make a big sale, they're going to try and hang on to their star assets. So we shouldn't discount the just stay at Palace option. But I think Chelsea versus Manchester United, the head, the logic, the package, the structure, the offering, the football decision, all leans towards Chelsea. But there is that heart, Manchester United. They made an earlier approach than Chelsea just to let the Olise camp know they might come calling. And that was under John Murtough before Sir Jim Ratcliffe came in. So there is a bit of history there as well. So let's wait and see. But I think Chelsea are quite calm about the situation. I think they feel if they're going to move definitively to Palace, not to Olise, to try and sign him, then they do stand a very strong chance of succeeding.
And just lastly on Olise, obviously he's not involved in the Euros or anything, so there's no complications of any major tournaments outside of the Olympics holding anything up. And it's obviously impossible to say, but when do you think, in your opinion, or anything you're potentially hearing, when do you think that Olise could make a decision on his future? Are we expecting sort of sooner rather than later? Obviously, it's not going to unlikely to be before the Euros, but do you expect maybe during the tournament we could hear something, or do you think now it could be afterwards?
That's what I mean when I say quick but considered decision. It's not really a contradiction in the sense that the suitors want a decision before the Euros, and that allows them, if they know. Sorry, I know we had a little mic issue there.
That's all right.
Back now. The suitors want a quick decision. And if they could get that decision before the Euros, then brilliant. But it's only like 2 days away now. So that allows them to know definitively where Olise is leaning. But the complication is you have to go through Crystal Palace first to really get a clear indication. So this could add a little bit of time. So the considered aspect of Olise will likely be ongoing. So when we say he's a slow decision maker, then that is because up until this point, he's not told anybody yet where his number one preference is. And I think suitors were hoping maybe for some kind of indication on that last week or this week. So that's the quickness that they're hoping for. So they know if it's kind of worth their while. And it's sort of chicken and egg, like I said before, because how do you get a clear indication you're the front runner for Olise without going to Olise? And at what point might Crystal Palace feel they're being bypassed? So it's a fine kind of line to play. But I would expect that Olise will want to know whether he's going or staying at Crystal Palace before this month is out.
Okay, interesting. And obviously, you know, Chelsea will have contingency plans in the wide areas. I mean, if Olise decides to stay at Palace or go elsewhere, there will be other targets. Somerville, the Leeds United winger, obviously Leeds not going up, you know, expected to need to sell some players. He probably falls into that category. You know, there have been reports suggesting Chelsea have looked at him. Liverpool as well have been mentioned in that respect. From what you understand, is Somerville a potential alternative for Chelsea if Olise doesn't come, and are Chelsea still looking to bring a wide player in, regardless of if Olise decides to stay at Palace?
Yeah, I think they want a wide player, they want a winger, and Somerville is about half the price of Olise, so that could be one to watch. Liverpool are the really serious suitor for Crescencio Somerville, and they see great value in the fact that, unfortunately for Leeds, they didn't go back up. I know that Chelsea fans will not want me to use that word, unfortunately, because of the rivalry between the clubs. But anyway, Leeds fans obviously think it is unfortunate. And the knock-on effect of that is that they're going to have to sell players. And whereas a youngster like Archie Gray, I'm told, is highly sought after, he would prefer to remain and do one more season minimum at Leeds. Somerville, I think they're going to have to sacrifice, and maybe Willy Gnonto as well, who has some interest from the Premier League. And I'm also told that Stuttgart and Monaco are two other European suitors for his potential signature. So Leeds argue, sources I speak to anyway, that this 100 million in sales number is a bit exaggerated because it doesn't factor in that on their next set of books, they've got money that they can declare towards the sales of Tyler Adams and Luis Sinisterra. And that means that maybe the number they're looking for is a bit closer to 70 million. So suddenly Somerville gets you halfway to that number. And I think 30, 35 million is the kind of ballpark that Liverpool feel might be decent value. So they've not put an offer yet. Let's wait and see. Like I said before, clubs have always got more than one option. And Chelsea will prioritise Olise over Somerville. That much I know. But as you say, if they don't get Olise for whatever reason, then they have a budget option, and then there's another knock-on effect. And it's the best way I can describe why the early part of the window is so unpredictable, because you either have pre-agreed deals like Tosin, and they're routine because they're lined up and they're often known about before the window opens. If you don't know about the deal by day one when the window opens, then usually we start this very unpredictable spinning of plates. And Chelsea may go for Olise, miss Olise, bring in somebody like Somerville or just somebody cheaper, and then suddenly they free up budget. So then a really big name, big money striker that they've discounted because actually they've ruled it out maybe only on value rather than desire. We very rarely hear the specific reason why a player's been ruled out. It's often just ruled out. So you say, okay, ruled out. But you might rule it back in if the only reason you ruled it out was financial. So if they decide the priority is Olise for their big money, they didn't get Olise, but they've got another very good option that saves them 30 million, then they may find another 30 million. And then to your point earlier, that may allow them to bring in a second striker if Duran arrives, or it may allow them to accumulate the budget towards a striker and suddenly feel comfortable spending 60, 70, 80 million. And then a range of other targets come into the fore, which again is why you keep Alvarez as a back burner, you keep a Ferguson in the conversation, because these are names where maybe Chelsea like the profile, but think there's a low chance of success and the price will be too high. So if you do suddenly find you can reallocate budget, and very rarely I think the fans look at business collectively, and you should do. Manchester United is another good example. Everyone says, oh, I hear we're advancing on Branthwaite to me, and oh, I hear we like Tobido, and I hear we're in the race for Olise, and I hear we like Joshua Zirkzee. Well, you're only going to get a maximum of two of them financially. If you sign Olise and you're Manchester United, there's no way they can then add 70 million and get Jared Branthwaite, not unless the Saudis come in and give them 100 odd million for a player like Casemiro. It's kind of the same at Chelsea at the moment. The fear is not about this financial year, but they're aware they've got to put money on the next financial year. And they're aware that outgoings are important to raise funds. So it's not only about PSR, it's about having extra money through outgoings to spend comfortably in the market and fund the window. And the other thing that I think is worth stressing is squad size too. And Enzo Maresca is in that Pochettino mold where he doesn't look at his senior squad at 25 to 27. He looks at the number that he'd like to work with as a core group of 23 to 25, which is why I think that Leslie Okwuchukwu will be sent out on loan. And it does present a challenge in well-stocked positions because, as you say, if Olise comes and you've got Madueke and you've got Sterling and you've got Mudryk, and if you're not going to play Palmer in midfield behind the striker, then he's a wide right player. So then that takes up a spot for a winger. So it's quite a difficult balancing act to both keep everyone happy and keep the squad numbers down. And this is why the outgoings are important as well.
I mean, just lastly, because I know we've got to wrap up shortly. Outside of, say, Olise and Somerville, are there any other names you're hearing that Chelsea have potentially got on their list or discussed internally in terms of wide players?
Not at the moment. They actually really like Sinisterra, but a long while ago before he ended up moving, of course, to Bournemouth. So that kind of profile has been on their radar for quite some time. But I think the other names being looked at the moment are more in other positions. We know that Chelsea have got a long-standing interest in Ousmane Diomande in defence, but that requires massive money. So they would have to be economical elsewhere to stand a realistic chance. And as I broke exclusively a few months ago and now is widely picked up, Bournemouth's Milos Kirkos is another name that Chelsea and Manchester United think very highly of. And then on the goalkeeper front, they will allow Maresca to decide who's the best ball-playing goalkeeper that he wants to persist with. And I think that Robert Sanchez will be quite glad by Maresca's arrival, because almost certainly if Pochettino had stayed, then Petrovic would have remained the number one, at least to begin the season. And now I think it's 50-50 between those two. But, you know, if you're Petrovic and you become number two, having been number one, or if you're Sanchez and you're not the number one, then the knock-on effect of being a goalkeeper is those names start to question their future. I think Petrovic will not be looking to leave Chelsea, nor will Chelsea sanction a sale, but that's not to say that he doesn't go back to being the number two. And then if he is the number one, then Robert Sanchez may be very unhappy sticking around. So you might end up needing more than one goalkeeper. So Chelsea can, even though it sounds a bit contradictory, be simultaneously looking at goalkeepers and backing their goalkeepers, because if Kepa goes as well, they may need another goalkeeper regardless. It looks like Newcastle are going to wrap up James Trafford. So Chelsea were one of the clubs considering him. but they didn't or haven't to date placed a bid to Burnley. The other name is Philip Jorgensen at Villarreal, who would suit Enzo Maresca's system really well. And he may be available around the 20-25 million mark as well. So it could be worth keeping an eye on that. But it's just about guarantees. You know, Chelsea in the wide area can give lots of guarantees to lots of players because they're outfield players. And it's going to be a long season if everything goes according to plan with the Club World Cup as well. It's 60 plus games. So you can say to virtually any young player, you're going to feature in 40 odd games, regardless of whether you're starting every week. And that might keep a number of players happy. But with the goalkeeper front, of course, you may say one is my UEFA Europa League goalkeeper and you're playing in all those games. And then you may say you're my domestic cup goalkeeper. So that might end up totaling 20, 25 games if you get lucky and you go far in tournaments. But the number one, because it's a big priority to Chelsea, will play in the Club World Cup because there's likely to be big financial riches on offer, although the package has not yet fully been agreed. So number one goalkeeper, Premier League, Club World Cup. Number two goalkeeper, likely all the rest of it. And whether or not that keeps everyone happy, it remains to be seen. Because if Jorgensen wanted to move, he would want to be told he was the number one goalkeeper. And I would expect him to reject a move to Chelsea unless he was given that guarantee. So when people kind of ask me, is Maresca going to have a say? The way he has a say is not just in a recruitment meeting of who you want, but also in how he plays and what his assessment is, having looked at both goalkeepers as ball-playing keepers. Because, you know, I'm a Leicester fan, as you know, so I've seen practically every game that Maresca has managed for Leicester. And the goalkeeper's a very specific role. Have to go short constantly, so that distribution, often under pressure, is important. And because teams know that the goalkeeper will always go short, they often take more of a risk, or they did in the Championship at Leicester, and they press, and mistakes can be made. And when Leicester beat Birmingham 2-1 at home at the King Power Stadium, Mads Hermansen made a mistake and he lingered on the ball for too long. And Jay Stansfield shut him down and blocked the clearance, and the ball went in the back of the net. And at half-time, Maresca said to his keeper, if I see you play it long, I'm subbing you off. And that wasn't a threat out of anger. That was a way of showing the player, it's my way or the highway. It's my style. And even if you make a mistake, don't worry about it, because the mistake is on my style. The mistake is on my system, which I think will pay off over time. So the goalkeepers are going to have a bit of a culture shock because they're going to have to spend a lot more time out their box. And it's not really like sweeper keeper. It's more considered. It's slower. It's incisive. They'll get many, many touches. I would be surprised if the Chelsea goalkeeper doesn't rank at the end of the season, either first or second, maybe only Ederson at Man City or Ortega or whoever's in goal for Man City, depending on what happens. But I would imagine the Chelsea number one goalkeeper will rank first or second by maybe 200 passes more than any other goalkeeper in the league. So Maresca can't really make a call on that definitively until he's met the goalkeepers, until he's seen them during pre-season, which is why he wants to give priority to what he's inheriting. But goalkeeper could still be one to watch as the window goes on.
Mate, very last question, just very briefly. We touched on potentially looking for a younger left back. Obviously, you mentioned Milos Kerkez, the Hungarian at Bournemouth. Obviously, to make space in the squad, someone's going to needs to leave out of Mark Correa and Ben Chilwell, you would imagine, to make room for another left back. We saw Correa have a bit of a resurgence towards the back end of the season, particularly inverting into midfield. His characteristics, to me, look like they very much suit an Enzo Maresca type of system. Ben Chilwell obviously hasn't reached the same form that he displayed, winning the Champions League and whatnot from those long-term injuries. Chelsea have been open to, obviously, offers for Correa. He could have gone to Man United on loan at the start of last season. Has his form at the back end of the season changed their thinking on that? And where do you stand on terms of if a left back comes in, who is more likely to leave out of Chilwell and Correa? Because I think under Chelsea fans, the opinions probably massively changed. It would have been Correa, but now probably people, if they had a choice, would be more open to Chilwell going. So what's kind of your understanding briefly on that?
Yeah, I think with Kerkez, Bournemouth value him at about 35 million, but I use value very loosely because they really don't want to sell him and he would want game time. So it'll be interesting to see whether Chelsea do go for a young left back, i.e. Kerkez, that can be a squad player, or a really young left back that can come in 2-3 years' time. So then you have that staggering. And that's what Chelsea are trying to do, is sort of build a squad for players that are going to arrive in 25, in 26, in 27. And if you can have a 4-year age gap between what you've got and what's coming through, then the younger players are more satisfied that they've got 4 years to get into the Chelsea starting lineup week in, week out. Whereas if you buy Gyokeres, I agree with you, you've got maybe a problem. Although we know that Chilwell can play in more advanced positions. The other key thing is at Leicester, the inverted right back was the one that came into the midfield. Whereas logically at Chelsea, you could make an argument that you invert the left-sided Gyokeres because he's used to doing that and was excellent at doing that. And that gives him the edge over Ben Chilwell. So we don't know what Maresca's thinking yet because he hasn't even officially started at Chelsea yet, nor has he had any time with these players. So it would be remiss to make a prediction. But my own personal view is that Gyokeres now has grown into his reputation and price tag. And Chelsea feel like, because it was quite high what they paid, I should say, they're not going to get that money back. They're not going to sell Gyokeres for a profit, right? So maybe it's better to maximize him now as a Chelsea player and have him start to shine. So you can't discount a Gyokeres exit, but it's less likely than it was in January. And in my starting 11, not that anyone really cares, but if everybody's fit, I've got Sanchez in goal, which is controversial. I've got Gyokeres on the left instead of Chilwell. I've got Colwell and Fofana at centre-back. Yeah. I've got, in theory, but not for the first game because he's suspended, Reece James at right-back. And then you got to play Enzo Fernandez, Moises Caicedo if they're both peak and fit. So my reading is that Enzo Fernandez is like a Toni Kroos, defensive-minded central midfielder that's a playmaker that everything flows through. And Caicedo's your energy, your destroyer, your ball winner. And then you've only got room for one more midfielder, which is quite interesting in itself, because you either put Cole Palmer behind the striker or move Cole Palmer to the right-hand side. And in my lineup, I've got Palmer, and then I've got Jackson, and I've got Nkunku playing wide right, but it might be the other way around. I think maybe it's more logical that Nkunku is behind Jackson and Palmer's on the right side. The only reason I've got it the other way around is just because I like Palmer central. I think he's more effective there. So in this system, I have to force him into that position. And that means no Conor Gallagher, by the way. And then I've got Mykhailo Mudryk on the left-hand side because I think he's more suited. Although if you look at Raheem Sterling, Manchester City, he was a very, very wide winger under Pep Guardiola. So we shouldn't discount him. And that's what I mean about how interesting it is for Chelsea, right? Because you can debate it any way you like, but fit Conor Gallagher into that starting 11. And for me, anyway, it's at the expense of either Palmer or Nkunku. And when they're both fit, they're both playing. I suppose the only logic that you could make is Nkunku is false 9, Jackson is benched, Palmer is wide right, and then Gallagher is playing an attacking midfield. But for me, I don't think that's what Maresca will do, which is why I still think there's a realistic possibility that Gallagher can leave.
And then you just chuck Michael Olise into the mix as well to make things a little bit more exciting if he turns up. So yeah, there's certainly going to be plenty of options, you know, if the signings come through, keeping the squad fit. It's going to be exciting. It's a step into the unknown. Ben, thank you so much for your time, mate. It's greatly appreciated. Fascinating insight as always. I know it's a busy time for you, so really appreciate you jumping on. Guys, make sure you check out Ben. Follow me on Twitter. You know where to find him by now. If not, I'll link his Twitter in the description. Loads of great updates on there on all transfer news, Chelsea stuff, just general bits and pieces. So make sure you check him out. Guys, over 300 in the building with 30 subscribers away from 10K. Let's get those knocked off on the way out, people. So smash the subscribe button, get me to 10K, run up the likes. Guys, I'll be back with another stream tomorrow unless there's any major news popping out later today. So yeah, Ben, thanks for your time. Guys, thanks for tuning in. Subscribe, smash the likes. Catch you again in another one soon. Up the Chels.